Grand Admiral Tharos scoffed as he looked out at the museum collection the humans called a fleet. Obsolete rust buckets from wars long past, but his scoff turned to shock as the human fleet opened fire, blasting his flagship apart. Tharos gripped the armrests of his command chair aboard the Invincible, pride of the Ferengi Galactic Empire. 500 sleek, deadly warships, the mightiest armada in the galaxy, filled the viewscreen. They had pursued the last remnants of humanity, refugees fleeing conquered Earth to this remote star system. Now only this pathetic collection of ancient ships stood between Tharos and the final extermination of mankind. On the bridge of the 150-year-old UES Intrepid, Admiral Bryan Adams watched the mass of enemy contacts appear on the sensor display. He took a deep breath, the stale, recycled air of the cramped CIC filling his lungs. Around him, officers and crew in sweat-stained uniforms manned their posts, grim-faced. "Admiral, the flux capacitor is leaking again," Engineer's Mate Hernandez reported from the back of the bridge. "The duct tape patch won't hold for long. She's coming apart at the seams." Adams nodded, his eyes never leaving the tactical plot. The mighty Ferengi fleet versus his cobbled-together force of hand-me-down frigates, freighters with pop guns welded on, and salvaged fighters. A few thousand brave human souls against a professional military of millions. Earth had fallen, humanity enslaved, and this was their last chance to strike back. He punched the fleet-wide comm. "This is Admiral Adams. You all know the odds. We're outnumbered 100 to 1. Our ships are old, our gear is failing. But this is it, our last shot to give those Ferengi bastards a black eye. No retreat, no surrender. All power to forward shields and weapons. Launch all fighters. Pick your targets and give 'em hell." Tharos watched the viewscreen with a smirk as the human fleet approached. It was almost quaint seeing them put up one final struggle. The ships were relics, small frigates and destroyers that should have been scrapped decades ago. A handful of light cruisers, including what appeared to be an Intrepid class, formed the core of the formation. Tharos hadn't seen one of those rust buckets in over 100 years. He signaled to his comms officer, "Open a channel to the humans." The officer nodded and Tharos straightened his uniform before speaking. "This is Grand Admiral Tharos of the Ferengi Galactic Empire. Your species' pathetic resistance is at an end. Surrender now, and your lives will be spared. To an extent. Refuse, and you will be annihilated." On the Intrepid's cramped bridge, Adams listened to the message and shook his head. He had expected nothing less from the arrogant Ferengi leader. "Put me on," he told Lieutenant Singh. Adams took a breath before responding, his voice steady. "Tharos, you arrogant prick, we're done being your slaves. This is our chance to spit in your eye one last time. You want these ships? Come and get them." He made a cutting motion across his throat and Singh closed the channel. The lieutenant looked at him expectantly. "Arm the Shiva warheads and prepare a full spread of torpedoes," Adams ordered. "Target their lead dreadnought." Singh grinned fiercely. "With pleasure, sir." As the distance closed, alarms started pinging on the Invincible's bridge. An officer studied his display with a frown. "Admiral, sensors are picking up strange energy readings from the human ships. Some kind of radiation I've never seen before." Tharos waved a hand dismissively, not taking his eyes off the approaching fleet. "Ignore it. Probably just interference from those antique fusion cores they use. Prepare to fire." The human ships entered weapons range, and Tharos leaned forward in his seat. "All ships open fire, wipe them out." The Ferengi fleet unleashed a storm of missiles and energy beams at the human ships. Explosions blossomed in the darkness of space. The space between the fleets erupted with light and fury. Plasma beams and railgun slugs streaked out from the Ferengi ships, over 1,000 deadly lines of fire racing toward the human fleet. The decks of the old United Earth Navy ships rattled as their point defense grids flared to life. Automated turrets swiveled and spat crimson beams back at the incoming ordnance. Explosions burst in the void as the lasers intercepted the enemy fire with shocking precision. It wasn't enough. The sheer volume of Ferengi weapons overwhelmed the humans' defenses, A destroyer to port of the Intrepid vanished in a blinding fireball as a clutch of plasma beams speared through its hull. The frigate Hornet lost a drive pod to a slug impact and spun away, venting atmosphere. More human ships fell, consigned to oblivion by the implacable enemy guns. The Intrepid shuddered violently. Sparks exploded from an overloaded console. The lights flickered, and a support beam crashed to the deck. Adams gripped the arms of his chair as damage reports flooded the bridge displays. Breaches in the forward torpedo bay. Casualty reports from the crew deck. A fire in the landing bay. He ignored it all, his gaze locked on the looming enemy dreadnought. "Torpedoes locked and ready," Singh called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. Adams stabbed a finger at the view screen. "Fire!" The Intrepid's prow lit up as the forward tubes flushed. 20 torpedoes burst free on plumes of exhaust, racing away toward the Ferengi flagship. The enemy point defenses scythed the void, filling space with criss-crossing laser beams. Torpedoes died under the defensive fire, detonating prematurely. A handful made it through the barrage. Proximity fuses triggered. Starbursts of nuclear fire silhouetted the Ferengi dreadnought. On the Invincible's bridge, the sensor officer bolted upright, his eyes wide. He whirled to face Tharos, his face pale. "Admiral, the energy readings, those torpedoes had antimatter warheads." Tharos surged to his feet, disbelief etched on his angular features. "Impossible, antimatter weapons are banned. The humans don't have that capability." As if to refute his words, the human ships belched fire. Hundreds of torpedoes, far more than their magazines should have been able to hold, leapt from their tubes. Tharos watched the incoming ordnance with growing horror. If each of those carried the destructive power he had just witnessed. "Evasive action," he barked. "All power to shields. Shoot them down, shoot them all down." The Ferengi ships scattered, desperate to escape the oncoming storm. The antimatter torpedoes streaked through the void, slamming into the Ferengi fleet with the force of 1,000 suns. Shields flared and failed under the onslaught, unable to withstand the raw destructive power of annihilated matter. The first rank of Ferengi capital ships simply ceased to exist, consumed by blinding flashes of light as the torpedoes detonated. Shockwaves ripped through the formation, shredding the closest vessels like tissue paper. Armor plates buckled and hulls ruptured, spilling atmosphere and debris into the void. In the span of seconds, 30 mighty Ferengi warships were reduced to expanding clouds of incandescent plasma and twisted metal. 1,000-meter battle cruisers broke apart, their spines snapped by the force of the blasts. Destroyers tumbled end over end, leaking air and bodies. Dreadnoughts fired their thrusters in desperate attempts to escape the maelstrom, only to be caught by secondary explosions as their antimatter reactors went critical. On the bridge of the Intrepid, the crew erupted in cheers as the sensor feeds showed the destruction they had wrought. Hardened veterans and green recruits alike shouted in triumph, hugging each other and pounding each other's backs. Even the normally stoic Admiral Adams allowed himself a fierce grin. He stood from his command chair, his fist punching the air. "How do you like that, you Ferengi bastards? All ships close to point-blank range and engage at will. Today we show them what humans are made of." As one, the ragtag human fleet surged forward, straining their old sublight drives to the limit. Maneuvering thrusters flared as the ships jockeyed for position, angling for optimum firing solutions. Fighters and assault shuttles launched from hangars, adding their guns to the fray. The Ferengi ships recovered quickly, though, rallying around their wounded flagship. They turned to face the oncoming humans, their weapons already spitting fire. The two fleets interpenetrated, weaving through each other in a chaotic knife fight at ranges measured in kilometers, rather than astronomical units. The Intrepid shuddered as a railgun slug glanced off her pitted armor, leaving a jagged rent in the ablative plating. Point defense lasers stabbed out at incoming missiles, filling the void with crisscrossing beams of coherent light. A destroyer off the cruiser's starboard bow exploded as a plasma beam punched through its overloaded shields and into the reactor compartment. On the bridge of the Invincible, Tharos snarled orders, his earlier amusement forgotten. His eyes locked on the weaving Intrepid, hatred burning in his gaze. "All ships, focus fire on that damned Intrepid. I want that admiral's head on my wall." The Ferengi flagship and a dozen other dreadnoughts swung their prows towards Adams's cruiser, abandoning their engagements with the human escorts. Weapons ports glowed star-bright as they unleashed a storm of fire at the lone vessel. Impossibly, the Intrepid jinked and slid through the firestorm, its helmsman guiding the ship through minute gaps in the barrage. Armor melted and ran in glowing rivulets as near misses scorched the hull, but still the cruiser twisted and rolled, lashing out with its own guns whenever a target presented itself. Tharos clenched his fists as the Intrepid loosed another spread of torpedoes, blasting an escorting battleship to fragments. He opened his mouth to scream new orders, but the words died on his lips as a new contact suddenly appeared on the tactical plot. A Ferengi battle cruiser, maneuvering to bring its broadside to bear on the humans, unwittingly crossed into the Invincible's line of fire. Time seemed to slow as Tharos watched the disaster unfold. The mighty dreadnought's guns, locked on the human flagship, continued to cycle even as the battlecruiser blocked the Intrepid from view. Railgun slugs and plasma beams, meant for Adam's ship instead, slammed into the battlecruiser's shields, overwhelming them instantly. The Ferengi vessel exploded in a brilliant flash, shattered by its own flagship's guns. The Intrepid shuddered as a plasma beam grazed its hull, leaving a molten scar along the cruiser's flank. Sparks erupted from overloaded consoles on the bridge. Smoke filled the air. Adams coughed, waving a hand to clear his vision. The tactical display showed the Ferengi flagship, the Invincible, carving a path through the melee towards them, its guns hammering the human ships mercilessly. "We can't take another hit like that," Hernandez yelled from the engineer's station. "Shields are down to 20%. Adams gritted his teeth. They needed to take out Tharos's dreadnought or this battle was lost. He turned to Singh at the weapons console. "What's the status of our Shiva warheads?" Singh checked his display, brow furrowed. "We have 3 left, sir, but they're not antimatter. There's something else, some kind of exotic matter." Adams's eyes widened as realization dawned. He recalled a top-secret briefing from Dr. Hawking, the lead scientist of the UEN's Advanced Weapons Division. The man had promised a game-changer, a weapon that could turn the tide against the Ferengi. "That crazy bastard actually did it," Adams muttered. "He made good on his word." He faced Singh, a plan forming in his mind. "Load the Shivas into our last 3 torpedoes and prepare to fire on my mark." He spun to Hernandez. "Divert all power to engines. We need to get close to the Invincible." Hernandez nodded, hands flying over her console. "Aye, sir, engines to maximum." The Intrepid surged forward, ploughing through the debris field of destroyed ships. Its hull groaned under the stress, the old cruiser pushing its limits. Railgun slugs and plasma beams slammed into the weakening shields as the Intrepid charged headlong at the Ferengi flagship. On the Invincible's bridge, Tharos watched the human cruisers approach with disdain. "Suicidal fools," he spat. "Blow them out of the stars." The dreadnought's guns swiveled to face the Intrepid, locking on with malicious intent. Adams saw the muzzles glowing hot as they prepared to fire, knowing his ship couldn't survive a full barrage. Warnings flashed urgently on the damage control console, hull breaches across multiple decks. Fires raging in the engine room, shield integrity falling fast. "Torpedoes ready," Singh reported, his face bathed in the crimson light of the flashing damage alerts. Adams clenched his fist. They were only going to get one shot at this. "Fire the Shivas," he roared, "then get us the hell out of here." The Intrepid shuddered as the trio of torpedoes burst from its forward tubes, racing away on pillars of blue-white drive flame. Tharos saw the incoming warheads and scoffed. "More anti-matter weapons. Our point defenses will handle them easily." He watched unconcerned as the torpedoes neared, the Invincible's defensive lasers swiveling to acquire lock. But then, in the blink of an eye, the Shiva warheads accelerated to impossible speeds. They crossed the last kilometer to the dreadnought in microseconds, blurring into smears of light too fast for the tracking computers to follow. The Shivas slipped past the Invincible's shields as if they didn't exist and slammed into the dreadnought's hull. For a single, drawn-out heartbeat, nothing happened. Tharos frowned, confusion writ large on his angular features. Then the Invincible crumpled in on itself, like an invisible fist had reached out and crushed the mighty warship into a singularity. Metal screamed and tore, bulkheads collapsing and compartments imploding. In less than a second, the pride of the Ferengi fleet vanished, compressed into an infinitesimal point of absolute darkness. The bridge of the Intrepid fell silent. Jaws hung slack as the crew stared at the forward view screen, trying to process the impossible scene. Where the mighty Ferengi dreadnought had loomed just moments before, only a pinprick of utter blackness remained. Hernandez found her voice first, a hoarse whisper that cut through the stunned atmosphere. Jesus Christ, what the hell were in those warheads? Adams blinked, shaking off the shock. They had to act fast, press the advantage while the enemy reeled. He punched the fleet-wide comms. All ships, the flagship is down. I repeat, the Invincible is destroyed. Concentrate fire on the nearest dreadnought and don't let up. As if shaken from a spell by Adams' voice, the human fleet surged forward with renewed purpose. The battered ships swarmed the closest Ferengi capital ships, guns blazing. The Ferengi fleet, still reeling from the loss of their flagship and Grand Admiral, struggled to mount a cohesive defense. Their formation fractured as individual captains barked conflicting orders, trying desperately to regroup. On the bridge of a Ferengi battleship, the captain pounded his fist on the armrest of his chair. All weapons, focus fire on that damned relic. It's just an old cruiser. It shouldn't be this hard to kill. His sensors officer interrupted, voice tight with fear. Sir, we're detecting more of those strange energy readings from the human ships. I think they're charging up more of those impossible weapons. The color drained from the captain's face as he watched the human fleet close in, the Intrepid at the spear tip. He jabbed a clawed finger at the comm station. All ships fall back. Regroup at Rally Point Delta. But it was too late. 3 more human torpedoes, the Shiver warheads, leapt from the Intrepid's forward tubes. They crossed the distance to the battleship in heartbeats, accelerating to physics-defying velocities. The Ferengi point defenses, already taxed to the limit, couldn't even track the incoming warheads, let alone shoot them down. The Shivas slammed into the battleship's shields, bypassing them as if they didn't exist. For a single frozen instant, the massive Ferengi vessel seemed to waver, as if viewed through a heat haze. Then, like the Invincible before it, the battleship vanished, crushed into a pinprick singularity by the impossible power of the human weapons. The Ferengi fleet limped through space, their formation fractured and scattered. Plasma fires burned uncontrolled across the hulls of once proud ships. Debris fields marked the graves of dozens of destroyed vessels. On the bridge of the battlecruiser Acquisitor, Captain Brack gripped the armrests of his command chair, his knuckles pale. "Status report," he barked. "Shields are down to 12%, the tactical officer reported, his voice shaking. Deck 7 has lost atmosphere. We have hull breaches across multiple sections. Main reactor is offline." Brack snarled. To be defeated so thoroughly by the humans, mere primitive primates, no, it was unthinkable. A lifetime of Ferengi supremacy shattered in a single engagement by an enemy they had discounted. The comms officer suddenly straightened in his seat. "Captain, priority message from Ferengi Prime. It's the Emperor himself." Brack's stomach turned to ice. He forced his voice to remain steady. "Put it through." The face of Emperor Zarkon appeared on the view screen, his features etched with barely controlled rage. "Captain Brack, I am ordering all ships to fall back to Ferengi Prime immediately. Abandon the offensive. Your sole priority is now to defend the homeworld at all costs. Is that understood?" Brack hesitated, torn between his duty to obey and his burning desire to avenge this humiliation. To turn tail and flee before the humans, it was almost too much to bear. But the Emperor's gaze bore into him, promising swift retribution for any defiance. "Yes, Emperor," he said finally, the words bitter on his tongue. "It will be done." The screen went dark. Brack turned to his helmsman. "Set course for Ferengi Prime, maximum speed, and broadcast the retreat order to all remaining ships. We're leaving." As the battered Ferengi fleet turned and began to accelerate away from the battle, the human ships doggedly pursued. Antimatter torpedoes, the last dregs of their stocks, streaked from the human vessels to harass the fleeing Ferengi. The Acquisitor shuddered as a near miss overloaded its weakened shields. On the bridge of the Intrepid, Admiral Adams watched the Ferengi retreat with grim satisfaction. The deck was a shambles, consoles sparking, and debris strewn across the floor. But the viewscreen showed the once mighty enemy armada in full flight, and that made it all worth it. "They're running scared now," he said, "but this isn't over yet." He turned to Hernandez at the engineering station. "What's our status, Lieutenant?" Hernandez wiped soot from her brow, her uniform singed. "We're down to our last Shiva warhead, Admiral. Antimatter reserves are nearly depleted too. We've got a dozen torpedoes left, maybe less. And our reactors are running on fumes. We're in no shape to press the attack." Adams nodded slowly. The adrenaline was fading now, the magnitude of what they had achieved beginning to sink in. They had won a great victory here today, but the war was far from over. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "All ships fall back to the rally point. We need to regroup, resupply, and lick our wounds." He gazed at the starfield on the view screen, imagining the worlds that lay beyond. Ferengi Prime, the heart of the enemy empire. "And then," he said softly, "we're going to take the fight to the Ferengi's own backyard. We'll hit them right where they live. This has gone on long enough. It's time to end this, once and for all." The Intrepid came about, the battered human fleet following in its wake. Ahead lay a brief respite, a chance to gather strength, and beyond that, destiny. The road to Ferengi Prime. The Intrepid drifted in the void, its hull pitted and scarred from the ferocious battle. Around it, the battered remnants of the human fleet hung in space, licking their wounds in the concealing embrace of a vast, uncharted nebula. Aboard the Intrepid's bridge, a tense calm reigned as damage control teams put out the last of the fires and restore power to critical systems. Admiral Adams stood at the tactical display, watching repair drones swarm over the crippled ships. They were alive, but just barely. It would take time to get the fleet back in fighting shape, time they might not have. The comms panel beeped an alert. "Admiral, incoming transmission from Earth Defense Command. It's General MacArthur, Priority 1. Adams raised an eyebrow. "Put it through." The screen wavered, then resolved into the craggy face of General Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander of Earth's military. "Admiral Adams," he said without preamble, "we've received your report on the battle and the Ferengi's retreat. Incredible work out there. You've bought us some precious time." Adams straightened, surprised by the call. "Thank you, sir, but we're not done yet. We need to take the fight to Ferengi Prime before they can regroup and counterattack." MacArthur nodded, his expression grave. "Agreed, and that's why I'm contacting you. We've been working on a secret project, a weapon that could end this war once and for all. It's a new type of warhead codenamed Ragnarok, and it makes the Shiva look like a firecracker." Adam's eyes widened in shock. The Shiva warheads had been devastating, crushing Ferengi dreadnoughts into pinpricks of darkness. The thought of something even more powerful was both exhilarating and terrifying. "More powerful than the Shiva? How is that possible?" he asked. MacArthur leaned forward, his image filling the screen. "It's based on a theoretical particle, the Higgs boson, that our scientists have finally managed to stabilize and weaponize. A single Ragnarok warhead, delivered to the heart of Ferengi Prime, could destroy the entire planet and cripple their empire forever." The bridge fell silent as the magnitude of the general's words sank in. A weapon that could destroy an entire world. It was almost unthinkable. Adams swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. "But sir, how do we deliver it? The Ferengi homeworld will be heavily defended, and our fleet is in no shape for a frontal assault." MacArthur smiled grimly. "That's where you come in, Admiral. We have a plan, but it's going to require a hell of a lot of guts and a little bit of luck." He tapped a command, and a schematic appeared on the screen, replacing his image. It showed a small, sleek ship, little more than a wedge studded with engines. This is the X-101 Infiltrator, a prototype stealth ship. It's designed to slip past enemy sensors and defenses. We're going to load the Ragnarok warhead onto this ship and send it on a one-way trip to Ferengi Prime. Adam studied the schematic, his mind racing. It was a daring plan, but also their only real chance to end the war quickly. "Who's going to fly it?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. MacArthur's face reappeared on the screen. "That's the other reason I called, Admiral. We need our best pilot for this mission, someone with the skills and the nerve to pull it off. We need you, Adams." The weight of the responsibility settled on Adams's shoulders. He knew the risks, knew that it was likely a suicide mission, but if it could save humanity, if it could end this war... He squared his shoulders and met the general's gaze. "I'll do it, sir. When do I leave?" MacArthur's face was grim on the view screen. "We captured a Ferengi stealth frigate. It has their best cloaking tech. We're stuffing it with the Ragnarok warhead and a squad of our top operatives. They'll sneak into Ferengi space, get past the defenses, and take that warhead right to the planet's core. Your fleet will attack their outer defenses as a diversion." Adams felt a thrill of excitement at the sheer audacity of it. This was the kind of desperate all-or-nothing gambit he lived for. "It's a hell of a risk, but our best shot. I'll lead the diversion myself, buy those operatives every second I can." The bridge became a hive of activity as the crew rushed to battle stations, readying the Intrepid for what was sure to be the fight of their lives. In the midst of the controlled chaos, Adam's personal comm pinged with an incoming message. He pulled it up and read quickly. The stealth frigate Ghost had penetrated Ferengi space undetected and was heading for the homeworld. Deep in enemy territory, the Ghost drifted silently through the void, its black hull drinking in the light of distant stars. In the cramped confines of the ship, Captain Sarah Thompson watched her hand-picked team of operatives prep their gear with practiced efficiency. They were the best of the best, each worth a battalion in their own right. Thompson had fought her way up the ranks in covert ops, earning her scars in 100 black missions. She'd lost friends, lovers, parts of herself that she could never get back. But it had all led to this moment. The fate of humanity itself rested in their hands. As they neared Ferengi Prime, Thompson checked the ship's sensors and felt her blood run cold. The readings showed a massive fleet in orbit, far larger than any intel had suggested. Swarms of battleships, dreadnoughts, and carriers, all bristling with enough firepower to glass a continent. "They've made us," she said grimly. "Those ships are moving to intercept. We'll never make it to the planet's core." Her second, a grizzled veteran named Hawkins, met her gaze. In his eyes she saw the same realization, the same grim resolve. They both knew what had to be done. Thompson took a breath, then spoke. "We can still finish this. We'll take the warhead right into the heart of that fleet, detonate it there, vaporize as many ships as we can. It's the only way now." Around the cramped cabin, heads nodded as her team digested the new plan. They understood the stakes. They knew this was a one-way trip. Thompson saw no fear in their eyes, only a fierce determination. They were ready. She punched a command into the console, and the Ragnarok warhead hummed to life, its containment field bathing the cabin in an eerie blue glow. Thompson thought of Earth, of the billions of lives hanging in the balance. "Let's make it count." The Intrepid shuddered as another volley of plasma fire slammed into its weakening shields. Sparks erupted from overloaded consoles, filling the bridge with acrid smoke. Adams gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles pale. "Divert all power to forward shields and weapons," he barked. "Keep firing no matter what." The human fleet, battered but unyielding, surged forward into the teeth of the Ferengi defenses. Antimatter torpedoes and Shiva warheads tore through the enemy ranks, leaving trails of destruction in their wake. But the Ferengi fought back with the desperate ferocity of cornered animals, their ships pouring out a relentless storm of fire. On the Ghost, Thompson watched the battle unfold on the viewscreen, her heart pounding. The stealth frigate darted through the chaos, its cloaking device rendering it all but invisible to the enemy sensors. But even with their advanced technology, Thompson knew their luck couldn't hold forever. She turned to her team, seeing the grim determination etched on their faces. They all knew the odds of survival were slim to none, but they also knew what was at stake. The fate of humanity itself hung in the balance. Thompson's hand hovered over the detonation controls for the Ragnarok warhead. One press of a button, and it would all be over. For the Ferengi, for her team, for herself. But she hesitated, watching the battle rage around them. Suddenly the Ghost sensors flared with a proximity alert. Thompson's eyes widened as she saw the massive shape of a Ferengi dreadnought, easily 10 times the size of their frigate, bearing down on their position. "That's the Emperor's flagship," whispered her tactical officer, awe and fear mingling in his voice. Thompson felt a sudden surge of clarity. This was their chance, their one shot to end the war right here and now. She locked eyes with each member of her team in turn, seeing the same realization dawn on their faces. "Arm the warhead," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Lock onto that dreadnought, we're going in." The Ghost leapt forward, its engines flaring as it raced towards the Ferengi flagship. The enemy ships surrounding it opened fire, their weapons tearing at the Ghost's shields. But Thompson held her course, her eyes fixed on the looming shape of the dreadnought. In the final moments she thought of Earth, of the billions of lives she was saving. She thought of Adams and the human fleet, still fighting with everything they had. And she smiled. "See you on the other side," she whispered. The Ragnarok warhead detonated. For a heartbeat there was silence. Then the fabric of space-time itself seemed to scream as the warhead unleashed its apocalyptic fury. A blinding flash of light engulfed the Ferengi fleet, the Emperor's flagship vanishing at its heart like a match flame in a supernova. The shockwave ripped outwards, shattering Ferengi ships like toys. Escape pods and debris tumbled through the maelstrom, the screams of the dying swallowed by the roar of the blast. In an instant, the mighty Ferengi armada was reduced to a field of shattered wrecks and cooling plasma. On the Intrepid's viewscreen, Adams watched in stunned silence as the Ragnarok's fury consumed the enemy. The bridge crew around him erupted into cheers and shouts of triumph, but Adams felt only a hollow ache in his chest. He knew the price that had been paid for this victory. He thought of Thompson and her team, of the countless other humans who had given their lives to make this moment possible. Their sacrifice would never be forgotten. As the last of the Ferengi ships surrendered or fled, Adams gave the order to stand down. The war was over. Humanity had won. But as he looked out at the devastation that surrounded them, he couldn't help but wonder at what cost. The galaxy had been changed forever by what had happened here today. The Ferengi Empire, once the terror of 1,000 worlds, had been brought to its knees by the courage and sacrifice of a handful of humans. But even as the survivors began to pick up the pieces, Adams knew that this was only the beginning. There would be other threats out there, other dangers waiting in the darkness of space. And humanity would have to be ready to face them, no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.